Thank you, Jack, for that fine speech. Order. Order. Thank you, Jack, for that fine speech and proposition of the motion. In side opposition, we are joined by Miss Angelica Guiloff. Angelica is a second-year MB PhD student reading Clinical Neurosciences at Pembroke College. She won the right to speak via open audition. Angelica, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you to the Union for the opportunity to speak here this evening. It's a real privilege. I'd like to start with some rebuttals, and then I'll move on to my main arguments. Have the proposition actually defined their terms? Did they define Blair acting alone or in his whole cabinet? Did they define Blair breaking Britain within his premiership or beyond that? What is this debate actually about? Is it dismantling or defending specific policies by Blair, labelling them as good or bad? No, it's whether he broke Britain. Have they defined a broken Britain? A greater concern that I have is I'm yet to hear any clarity on what metric we can even have to define what it means for Britain to be broken. And this is the responsibility of the proposition to define. Whether you think Blair was abominable or brilliant, I encourage you to think beyond the surface of this motion. What are the true roots of the problems that broke Britain as described by the proposition? My first main argument is in the context of the Iraq War and the economy. Blair did not break Britain, Thatcher and the Anglo-American alliance did. Let's again think about today's motion. You can argue that the Iraq War contributed to the breaking of Britain, but this debate again is whether Blair broke it. And Blair was not the sole cause of the Iraq War. Britain has never really had the freedom to act independently of the neoliberal world order. And what were the British origins of the Iraq War? In August 1990, Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait led Thatcher to urge Bush to action military intervention, manifesting in the US-UK alliance in the First Gulf War. Sorry, no thanks. I've had quite a lot from you. Blair then faced US pressure from Bush to join the 2003 Iraq invasion. The real motive behind this, as with most Western interventions, was Hussein's policy. This conflict began 30 years earlier with a nationalisation of the oil industry, then linked to attempting to sell oil in euros instead of petrodollars. This is not a coincidence. This was a punishment for retaliating against US control over Iraq's oil. The groundwork for this conflict was laid by Thatcher and Reagan, the idea of entering a conflict to stop Iraq from creating an economy that wasn't built on serving the West.
Point of information?
Yes.
Is it the case that many close American allies were asked to join the invasion of Iraq, including France, and many of them said no, and then it was Blair's decision to go in, and there was a reason why in Washington, D.C. for a while...
Thank you. Yes, yes. Thank you.
Freedom fries?
Yes, so I'll go on to argue that. The British and American imperialist alliance have repeatedly culminated in conflict, the so-called US-UK special relationship. The UK has no true leverage in conflict decision-making, and the last time the UK refused to send troops with the US was in 1960's Vietnam War, over 60 years ago, and the UK was punished for this. It was held over Britain's head, and UN policy was continuously referencing the fact that they didn't do that. The US and UK have also in the past worked together to overthrow Iran's democratically elected prime minister after they nationalised the Anglo-Iranian oil company that's now known as BP. And this restored authoritarian regimes and then fueled the later Iranian revolution that caused more regional instability. My main point is that history will always rhyme, and to claim that this was an isolated event is giving Blair far too much credit for these atrocities. No thanks. It was US alliance influence as part of this alliance that pushed this decision. The Shilko inquiry found that there was US impatience with UN diplomacy and increasing pressure on allies to align with the US. Countries that did resist US policy in Iraq were faced with economic and diplomatic punishments. This is global power operating within a neoliberal world order that prioritized compliance and markets over sovereignty. For your point of information, Turkey, who refused to allow US troops to use their territory as a region for entering the Iraq War, was suspended $8.5 billion in aid, and they will only return that after they finally gave in to US pressure. Economic coercion is a hallmark of the neoliberal world order that Thatcher and Reagan paved the way for. And this neoliberal world order was built on free markets, privatization, and deregulation. Thatcher's policies, from the right-to-buy scheme, the erosion of trade unions, deepened inequality. Together, Thatcher and Reagan promoted a conservative and economically liberal agenda that prioritized profit, underpinning the money-driven motives that were seen in the Iraq War and conflicts beyond. And then onto the economy. Thank you for mentioning the 2008 financial crash. You actually even said that Thatcher caused it anyway, but I'll say it again. Thatcher backed and enabled the US dollar to become the world's reserve currency, and she pushed for the abandonment of gold as the reserve, which was the perfect setup for the 2008 financial crash. Whether you think Blair's economic policies were good or not, they did not break Britain in isolation, but echoed the neoliberal world order that was started by Thatcher and Reagan. And this was driven again by privatization, deregulation, and the pursuit of profit over social mobility and human rights. The perceived failures and breakings of Britain are based in complex ideologies and not individuals. Again, you're all giving Blair way too much credit. By placing all blame on him, you're making him far too important. Focus on individuals and systems that broke Britain in the first place and allow these issues to perpetuate. And this leads on to my next point, which is that Britain was already broken. Blair and Britain alike were byproducts of a larger system of inequality and US hegemony. Under this global world order, shaped by decades of neoliberal economics and American dominance, Britain was pushed into a corner economically and geopolitically. Thatcher's legacy had already left communities in decline, industries were dismantled, trade unions were weakened, and social mobility had completely stalled. By the time Blair had entered Downing Street, trust in politics was already low, and inequality was high, and cynicism towards both major parties was already prevalent. I'm about to try and prove this to you. How can I prove this to you? Between 79 and 97, manufacturing employment fell by over 4.5 million jobs. The Gini coefficient rose the most steeply from the 80s to the 90s. Trade union membership dropped by 6 million by 1997. A 1994 survey found that trust in governments had fallen by half in the previous 7 years, and child poverty more than doubled from the 80s to the 90s. Immediately following and during Blair's government, inequality did fall from these statistics, and long-term, this unfortunately was not upheld. Whilst Blair may have had an influence on that, the inequality that broke Britain was created by the Thatcher government, maintained by the global world order, and left unsolved by subsequent governments. I'm going to summarise. What were the true roots of the problems that broke Britain as described by the proposition? Not only did Blair inherit an already broken Britain, but there is evidence that there were attempts for reconstruction through his domestic policy. The proposition have failed to argue that Blair alone, within his premiership, was the pure cause of the downfall of Britain. You can vote for the opposition and believe that Blair was the worst leader on earth, or the best thing to happen to the UK. This debate is not about that. The perceived failures and breakings of Britain are based in ideology and not individuals. Focus on the factors that broke Britain in the first place and allow these issues to fester. Think about the systems that have and continue to maintain hegemonies and inequality. The systems that use bullying, coercion, and violence to maintain the status quo. And finally, I will leave you with one thought. Is it not more empowering to understand that real change lies in dismantling oppressive systems and not vilifying a single leader? Thank you for listening.